Blessed be everyone. Welcome to another Mystery Witch School live stream. I put the wrong date on my live stream for my correspondence, so sorry about that. If you've just found me thinking that it was last week, it was actually this week, not last week. Welcome to Mystery Witch School. If you want to know anything about Wicca, witchcraft, tarot, or shadow work, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss any videos or any live streams. If you want to get notified about any live streams that are coming, which are usually weekly at this time, then also hit the notification bell so that YouTube knows that you are wanting to see more lives. Hello, Stephanie, how are you? Today's topic, we're talking about Wicca in general and the traditions within Wicca and a little bit about the progression of it, I guess, over the years, because it certainly has progressed. And there's a lot of lots of different ideas and opinions about Wicca and what it is and what it isn't, and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and who should call themselves a Wiccan and who shouldn't, and all of that kind of fun stuff. So hello, Quentin. Hello, Funny Gaming. Welcome to the live stream. If you want to find out more about how you can get more involved with Mystery Witch School, how you can get on my mailing list so that you know when things are happening, I will put links in the chat towards the end, and also there's links in the description field underneath this video as well that you can go to get onto my newsletter, or to also sign up for any of the free things that I've got. There's the How to Start Your Witchcraft Practice. That is a free video that you can download to watch just to get a little bit of a roadmap to know where to start and how to pace yourself along the way, particularly if you're feeling a little confused because you've got all the books, which is great, but you're just not sure how to actually start learning it, and what's best to start with and what you can leave till a little bit later to work on. You can also download my free PDF Spellcaster Checklist. It is a checklist to give you some things to think about when you're casting spells or doing any sort of magic work, to plan your spells with more thought, and also to get down into the real reason why you're doing the spell in the first place, so that you can have better results with actually getting what it is that you actually want. They're the freebies, and at the end of the live, towards the end, I'll let you know more about the courses that are available and what's coming up as well for Mystery Witch School, and the different courses that are coming up as well. Thank you, Quentin. Thank you very much. Today we're talking about Wiccan traditions, so I will jump straight in and start talking about it. And as people come in, they'll come in. If you're watching the replay at all, still comment, still join in the conversation, because it's a really hot topic in a way. I've heard a lot of myths about Wicca. I've heard all sorts of things about whether you can call yourself a Wiccan or not because of dietary habits or different ways that you practice magic, down to how you define initiations or degrees, all sorts of things. So I thought we'd get to talking about that topic. Okay, dog, chickadad. I don't know how to pronounce any of that. I was doing this impression, and yesterday I bought witch bells and put them on my door. Every time I open it, it brings my joy. Of course it does. And bells are such a wonderful thing to listen to. They break the air up. So what they do, what a bell does or a chime does, is it breaks up that dense energy. And so when that energy is being sort of broken up, it starts to bring more chi into your vicinity and bring in that opportunity to have more joy and more of the positive stuff. So the bells are great at breaking up dense, unpleasant energy. Out of topic, but what stone would be better for a survivor, to tell a jasper or solar quartz? It really depends. I mean, solar quartz, or any of the quartzes, or not the quartzes, any of the Reds, yellows, oranges are great for positivity and invigorating yourself. They have a lot of energy, so they work on the lower chakras. So it really just depends where you may be finding some blockages or whatever it is from that. Yeah, it really depends on what you're experiencing as to which stones would be better, because I'm not quite sure what you mean there. Okay, so Wicca itself is, technically speaking, the religion aspect of witchcraft, modern witchcraft in the West. It started out from the whole modern tradition of Wicca came out of Gerald Gardner's witchcraft. So Gerald Gardner spent a lot of his time, a lot of his early years and young adulthood in Southeast Asia, and learned a lot from the indigenous people in that region. And he was very inspired by those people and their traditions, because they were sticking to their pagan traditions and working within the cycles of nature and not being caught up in what at the time was still very dominant, which was the type of Christianity that came more from the UK, where Gerald Gardner came from. And he was very inspired by these people, that he wanted to bring that heritage, that pagan heritage that we have in Northern Europe, back into the UK particularly. And that was his intention. So he went about searching for how he could do that. And the story goes that he came across a particular coven, and as a result of being initiated in those couple of covens, he was able to then bring those practices into the mainstream through actually coming out about witchcraft. When the witchcraft laws, the anti-witchcraft laws, were repealed back in the late 1950s in the UK. It came later in other countries, very late in Australia. So his passion really was to bring witchcraft back into the community in a way that was positive and productive, in the same way that he'd experienced it with the Indigenous people in Southeast Asia, practicing the way that they practiced. Because it was around the 1950s and 60s when all of this started coming out, he was very much a part of his time. So Gerald Gardner was a nudist, so he was very much into that naturalist way of working and being. So that filtered into his style of witchcraft, which is Gardenerian witchcraft. So there's nudity in Gardenerian witchcraft, at least traditionally there was, because Gerald Gardner himself was a nudist. So that's why it's there. It's not because it's a traditional thing that witches from eons ago did, particularly in places like the UK or Northern Europe, where it's damn cold for a lot of the year. So running around naked in the forest is probably not something a lot of people really did. But that's what he was into at the time, and that also was quite popular at the time too, if you look at the history of naturalism and that kind of thing. So it started with him. It started to come out into the public with him. And although he didn't call it Wicca, he did refer to practitioners as the Wicca, with W-I-C-A, not W-I-C-C-A. That came later, and it particularly came into flavor when the witchcraft craze, as they call it, came more into the US. And that's where the Old English term witcher, which is how it's pronounced in Old English, which means sorcerer or sorceress, came into more popular language, and we ended up with Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, which gives you the ch in Old English, and that's what we know today to be Wicca. So that's a little bit about where it started. But Gerald Gardner always referred to himself as a witch. Okay, so he referred to himself as a witch. So, and so did all of the other members of his coven and other people that were working with him, whether they were male or female, they referred to themselves as witches. He had a particular way of working within a Gardenerian tradition. He was heavily influenced by Freemasonry because he was, I believe, a co-mason. So the 3 degrees of Freemasonry that he was involved in anyway filtered over into Wicca. He liked that idea, so he brought it in. He brought a lot of bits and pieces in from different places because he was trying to revive something that he really didn't know what it was originally. There was bits of information from how the Druids may have done things. There was bits of information about the Norse way of doing things. So he kind of, plus his experience in Southeast Asia, and his experience with Freemasonry, understanding a little bit about the Golden Dawn, connections a little bit with Aleister Crowley, Indra Shah, and various other people, and put it all together in the form that we know of Wicca today, which is generally Gardenerian form. It's a closed coven, so you have to be initiated by another witch before you who has been initiated in that tradition to be a Gardenerian witch. It's the most traditional form of Wicca that you can get, and it's still around, and people are still very loyal to it and still practice within that tradition. And that tradition informed all of the other offshoots of that tradition that came later. Okay. Small pieces of all. Yes. So it is like all religions when they start. When you think about all religions all around the world, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, they all started somewhere, and they all started usually with a person and then a group of people around them who turned them into the form that we know of them as. So all religions started with a person and generally grew as a result of other people liking the idea and joining in, and then going through a progression of change and influence and all sorts of things. So Wicca is no different. It's just a more modern version of that process. Gerald Gardner did not really make himself out to be a guru or anybody coming to bring enlightenment or messages from, ascended masters or anything like that. So he wasn't sort of seen as being a prophet or anything like some other religions have prophets. He wasn't anything like that. He was really just a man who wanted to bring back paganism and witchcraft back into the soul of Western culture, because he felt that it was incredibly valuable, and he loved the connection that other cultures that still practice that way were enjoying. Okay, I looked it up. Hinduism is the oldest religion. Yeah, it's the oldest organized religion, I guess you could call it. There are other, I guess if you call shamanism a religion, which it isn't really, although I believe it is recognized as the state religion in places like Mongolia. But yeah, Hinduism is probably the oldest organized religion that we know of. Okay, best to explain those who ask me about it. Greetings. Greetings, Damien. I get, oh, you worship Satan. I say, no, that's your myth. Yeah. Wanted to stop in and say hello. Hello, Soaring Eagle. Yeah, the Satan thing. Just got to laugh at that one. So that was where Gardenerian witchcraft came in. And it's a particular style of witchcraft. It has the degree system. You have to be initiated into it. There's a lineage with it. So it goes back, it's supposed to go back anyway to Gerald Gardner, so that he's kind of like the father of the whole lineage, so to speak. And I would say that, Doreen Valiente was very much a part of that as well. She was the one that wrote all of pretty much most of the content, and all of those beautiful verses that we get from those days was adapted or written by her. And she was absolutely amazing. And I suspect she had a lot more to do with the growing of witchcraft in the Gardenerian tradition than she's perhaps given credit for. So there are other people that, of course, were initiated into the Gardenerian covens, and they, of course, went and formed their own covens. Traditionally, if you get more than 13 people in a coven, you would then have to hive off if you'd reached the second or third degree and form another coven. So that way then you had these little pods of covens sort of growing. And it's easier to manage a group when it's a smaller group than it is to manage a group when it's a larger group. You can be a lot more fair and egalitarian, a lot more diplomatic when you've got a smaller group. So one of those, or two of those people was Alex and Maxine Sanders, and they went off, hived off, and they ended up creating Alexandrian witchcraft or Wicca, which is a slightly different form of Wicca to Gardenerian Wicca, although heavily influenced. They weren't as fussed about secrecy like the Gardenerian witchcraft is, and they also introduced ceremonial magic into the mix. So that's where you'll get a lot of the workings that are very similar to ceremonial magic, a little bit more connected to some of the Golden Dawn stuff, is in your Alexandrian witchcraft. I know that I have heard some people say that Wiccan witchcraft is ceremonial magic and that you can't consider yourself Wiccan if you're not practicing ceremonial magic. I suspect those people are coming more from an Alexandrian tradition and don't realize that other traditions of Wicca actually don't care what you practice in regards to style of magic. Even if it's taught, it's neither here nor there. Magic is magic. So you've got people like Alexander's. They still have the 3-degree hierarchy. They had a clothing choice, so you could go sky-clad or you could wear robes. That was purely a matter for yourself. And they were more into the Hermeticism than Gardner was at that time. Okay, it doesn't actually have a founding father or mother. Okay. And Darren says, hi, Darren. Can you be a Celtic Wiccan? Yes, I was going to get to that. So you had other people. They also had Cochrane. Cochrane was also an earlier form of Wicca again, which was slightly different again. Then you've got people like Raymond Buckland who really brought it into the US. And so you've got Say's Wicca, which is his brand of Wicca, heavily influenced by the Anglo-Saxons, and more than tweaked to a US culture rather than the more English style of, say, Gardenerian Wicca. With Buckland, you also got a bit more of a feeling for the Norse deities like Woden and Freya. There was not necessarily an oath of secrecy either in that group, so it was a little bit more fluid, I guess you could say. And apparently, from my research, Buckland didn't have a clergy kind of system either, whereas in the earlier traditions of Wicca, say Gardenerian and Alexandrian, you've got the high priest and the high priestess, and then you've got priest and priestesses underneath that. And also you may have a council of elders as well. The coven that I was in initially, the first one, was more traditional. We had the high priest and high priestess. The high priestess had the last say, and there was a circle of elders. And the elders weren't necessarily elder as in age. They were, in our coven anyway, they were voted in. The first bunch weren't, of course, because there was only a small group of people when the coven started. But as the coven progressed and more people, I remember we had to, people put their hand up if they wanted to become elders, and then the rest of the coven would vote as to which one could take the place of maybe somebody who'd left. So there was more of a, I guess, a democratic approach in the coven that I was in. Whereas in some covens, it's not democratic. They're kind of elected by the high priest and high priestess. You've also got the Dianic witchcraft as well, which is another, which also came out of the US. And that one's got a very strong feminist focus. some of the famous witches would be like Zuzwana, Budapest. You've also got Morgan McFarland, and I think it's Mark Roberts, that are also very much into the Dianic Wicca and witchcraft. Budapest, it was females only, whereas I believe that with McFarland and Roberts, it was mixed. So that's another focus of Wicca, a very strong feminist female focus with a goddess only, and not working necessarily with a god, depending on whether it's women only or if it's mixed. I believe that their god may have also been a part of that. I'm not 100% sure about that. There is also Norse Wicca. So that obviously you're working with the Norse pantheon, so Odin and Freya and Thor and all of those deities. So that has a very strong Scandinavian Norse aspect to it mythologically. You do have Celtic Wicca as well, where you're working with the Celtic style and the Celtic deities. You've got fairy Wicca. You've got Druidic Wicca, so it's a bit of a hybrid of Druidism and Wicca. And of course, you've got solitary Wicca, which is most people probably practicing today would be solitaries. And you've also got eclectic Wicca, which is kind of a strange term really to use, because eclecticism sort of means that you're not really in a tradition. But with all of the different ways that Wicca has been practiced over, since the 60s or the late 50s, there's a lot of different ways that it's been practiced, and each solitary practitioner is going to have their own way of doing things, because you're doing it on your own, and you're going to have your own connections with the deities. You're going to have your own connections with the craft itself. Some forms of Wicca are very much more into ceremony and got more of a religious feel about them. So it's not so much about the old ways of practicing witchcraft, which is more getting down with your hands dirty in the dirt and working with herbs and working more with traditional witchcraft, which isn't technically a religion. It's more just a magical practice and a way of life. So you've got different types of Wicca that will embrace those different things. With my coven, we were a Wiccan coven, even though my high priest at one point got totally sick of the word Wicca, because at that stage in the early 1990s, Wicca was starting to get a bit hijacked by the New Age movement and started to be turned into something that was very much fluffy bunny. So people wouldn't even do a spell to help somebody out unless they had permission from that person to help them out. It sort of got to this extreme of it got to extremes of working magic, where people were basically getting too scared to work magic because they didn't want to manipulate anything or anyone at all, and they were always concerned about, first people's freedom of choice. So even if you're going to do a healing for somebody, you would have to ask their permission first, which could be difficult if they were. If you weren't able to contact them, or they were so sick that you weren't able to communicate with them. That's always a matter for yourself. I think these things are up to the individual as to how they sit with their own ethics and their own feelings about these things. But that was something that really was coming out in the New Age movement at that time, and it infiltrated into Wicca. And Wicca has been, I think, for a lot of witches who are more working in a more of a middle path or a middle road, who understand shadow work and shadow, who understand the reality of life and understand the place of magic throughout history, who understand shamanism. And I'm not talking about the New Age version of shamanism either, but shamanism as it was practiced traditionally by traditional cultures, including our European culture way, way back. That, witchcraft really is about walking not just between the worlds, but also understanding that there is polarity, that there is light and there is dark, and that it's always a bit of a balancing act as to how you go about life. And the New Age extreme of being only love and light is not realistic in our world, where there are shadows and noisy cats. So that's given Wicca, I think, a reputation of being a bit too fluffy bunny, not taken seriously. When we look at Hollywood and we look at the way Wicca is portrayed in Hollywood, it's seen as being this little fluffy bunny thing that no one takes seriously, because it's all about love and light and it's all about all that sort of stuff. And that's not the flavor of the trend at the moment. The trend is actually more to the dark side at the moment, unfortunately. But Wicca's kind of got this reputation also for being incredibly rigid, which is something I want to talk about after I have a look at the rest of the comments. Okay. Where are we? Okay. Considering myself as eclectic Wiccan and celebrate the feminine and masculine. And pretty eclectic, yes. Time of Fluffy Bunny. Ostara's Fluffy Bunny, yes, of course. Are we all not a coven? Oh, well, that's what I call it. Yes, well, yes. Absolutely. In a way, we're all part of the human. Anybody who's practicing, I guess, Wicca or witchcraft from a more so-called solitary position, in many ways, when we're practicing the moons and the seasons, we're roughly doing it around the same time, depending on where we are around the world. So in an energetic sense, we are actually influencing things energetically, even if we're not necessarily in contact with each other. Interesting. Okay, awesome. So with Wicca and a lot of the myths associated with it may be coming from people who belong to a particular tradition, or they belong to a particular school of Wicca. Wicca itself is not an institutionalized religion, although it has become one in some places. You've got the Church of Wicca, which is a form of institutionalizing of Wicca. I can see that the benefits to that means that you can set it up as a non-profit organization and be able to have a lot more offerings and services for people as a result of that, because you don't have all of the other issues of like taxation, for example. When I was in my second coven, which was the Lunar Crescent back in the probably more the mid 1990s, we did have a representative from a high priestess from the Church of Wicca over in Perth come over to us here in Brisbane to ask us to help set up a Church of Wicca here in Brisbane. And so we spent about, I think, maybe 2 weeks with her, and basically learning all about what the Church of Wicca involved. And she wanted us to basically form the inner circle of the Church of Wicca so that she could bring it here to Brisbane. We decided we didn't want to get involved because it seemed incredibly restrictive and kind of not traditional in the sense that of, I guess, gardeners' intentions, but not so much because we wanted to stick to tradition, but just simply because a lot of people love that kind of structure and they like to be involved in something that has a lot of, hierarchy and structure and steps, and that some people really thrive with that. And that's great if that's the sort of thing that you need and you thrive in that environment. Other people are a little bit more flexible and like to have a lot more flexibility in how they practice their spirituality. And the institutionalizing Wicca is, I guess, offering people who need that, but to think that that is only Wicca and that's the only real Wicca is an institutionalized version of it is totally wrong and historically not really correct either. So when people are criticizing to say that you're naming the initiations like the first degree, second degree, third degree initiations incorrectly, or what they are, they're speaking from their own experience of what their tradition is, and they may not be aware that other traditions name things differently and also practice things sometimes a little bit differently. So they may practice folk magic and sympathetic magic and traditional witchcraft as well as ceremonial magic. So there's diversity. In Wicca, there was really only one convention, and that, or the law, as they'd say, which is that harm none and do what thou wilt. And that's always been what has been said to be the only requirement, that you try your best not to harm yourself or others, okay? But you can only try your best with that because it's impossible to live in this 3D world without harming anything. It's impossible. So we can't do the impossible. But when it comes to your diet, there's no rules with your diet. And I've heard people say that you can't be a Wiccan if you don't have this particular way or philosophy of diet. That's a matter for yourself. It really is. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're not. Maybe their little coven operates that way, but there's never been any restrictions on diet. You eat whatever you eat. Okay, and that means you can be vegan, you can be vegetarian, you can be a meat eater, you can follow the paleo diet, you can intermittently fast, you can do whatever you want. Okay, there is no law there or rules there in regards to Wicca. There might be for a particular coven, or there may be traditions coming out of a particular dietary ideology, but that isn't all of Wicca. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there because I've heard that a fair bit. Hard to, when you have people obsessed with you, not to hex. Yes, it is. I think when it comes to protecting yourself, look at it more from protection. So when it comes to cursing or hexing, I'm referring to doing harm to another person, I guess. And I feel that unless you're in absolute extreme circumstances, that you can protect yourself without necessarily harming another person. So you may go pretty heavy, maybe with assisting the law to get involved. You may go pretty heavy in deterring that person in whatever way you need to deter them. And it's up, if you're working with other beings like deities or spirits, then it's up to the spirit perhaps how they deal with that person. But try your hardest not to actually have to harm that person in order to protect yourself. I understand that when you are in reality, if somebody had a gun to your head and you had the opportunity to defend yourself, and the only way you can defend yourself would be to reverse that and basically get them before they get you, and that is a reality, then you do what you have to do. But in magic, try to see what other options are there first, if you know what I mean. Yeah, try warding off people, doing whatever you can, essentially, without harming, if you can. Yes, I'll put the link in the chat session to booking tarot session with me, and other things as well that you can do if you want to become involved. So let me know in the comments field or in the chat what you've heard about Wicca that you felt isn't correct or that you're confused about, so that we can talk about that now. And I'm going to pop into the chat field booking information if you're wanting to book a tarot session with me, because I do tarot coaching and I also use the oracle cards as well. So you can book one-on-one sessions with me, either a half-hour session or an hour session with me. So I'll put that in here. So it's a form that you fill out and requesting it, and then I'll get back to you with the details. So that's if you want to book a tarot session. I like to coach when I'm teaching tarot as well, rather than necessarily predicting the future, because I think the tarot has a lot of benefits in actually helping us grow as people and get more familiar with the choices we're making and how we're actually creating our own reality rather than reality creating us, because that's the whole magical point of view, is that we're creating our reality rather than being jellyfish in the ocean and creating our own and being pushed around by some unseen forces out there that are against us. Okay, Edward, just now my mundane world just electronically just went out while you were talking. Okay. So Wicca is a lot of different things now. It isn't one thing now. And I think what really brings it together, and for me, what the principles of Wicca is that definitely try not to harm and stay alive at the same time. You certainly have a right to use magic to help yourself in life, to improve your life, to attract the things you want to you. You can use magic to also help yourself understand yourself more. Wicca is a spiritual path, so it is about connecting to your higher self and your spiritual leanings and what basically enlivens your heart. It should be a path with heart. And if have come across any groups or covens or people who you're involved in and you don't feel it's a heart path, like it's not coming from the heart, it's coming more from the head, rules, regulations, egos, opinions. If it's not coming from the heart, then go somewhere else and find somebody else to work with, because it should be a path with heart. Any genuine really spiritual practice or spiritual tradition should have heart in it. It should be about enlivening ourselves, having more joyful lives, having more connected lives. It's about becoming, I don't want to say better people, it's becoming more ourselves and reclaiming who we are through the process of learning. With Wicca, we do circles. We celebrate the Sabbats, which are the seasonal times of the year. There's 8 of them. We celebrate the full moons and the new moon. We work within generally a circle structure. We often will work ceremonially, working with a pentagram in a similar way that ceremonial magicians do. But by and large, it's about connecting to nature, connecting to your true self, coming back to yourself again, reclaiming who you truly are, and practicing magic when you feel like practicing magic or feel the need to practice magic, enjoying working with the gods and goddesses, and just bringing more joy and happiness into your life and changing your life for the better. They really should be the principles of Wicca, rather than being too concerned about what your diet is, what your political orientation is, or even what your political ideology is, or what steps should come before the next step, and whether you should do something in a regimented fashion. It really should be about having a path with heart. Okay, why do I have different deity and god from different pantheon when I'm sleeping? I have Cernunnos and Selene, the manifest, and I don't really know what to do about that. So you work with different deities from different pantheons when you're sleeping. So that means when you're actually sleeping, you're working with different deities in your dreams? Because you're working with Selene, who's Greek, and Cernunnos, who's Celtic. There's nothing wrong with working with the deities. If you're working with Cernunnos by himself, or if you're working with Selene by herself, there isn't an issue with that. And I know that there are Wiccans who work with the god and goddesses from different pantheons together. Personally, I feel it's better to work with them within the same pantheon if you can, because the energy is more historically connected and mythologically connected. So if you're working within the Greek pantheon, then working with the Greek gods. If you're working within an Egyptian pantheon, working with the Egyptian gods. But that's how I prefer to work, and it's also how I've worked in the past and with the covens as well. Balance. Yes, balance. If the magical bag makes your magic more powerful, you can, so making like a Gregory bag or something like that. What the bag does, it's a talisman, essentially. And the process of putting your bag together is also energetically fulfilling because you're focusing on something, you're being creative, and as you're putting the objects into the bag, you're putting energy into the bag because you're focused on what it is that you're doing. A lot of magic, the magic is in your focus of doing the activity itself of magic, rolling your candle, gathering your herbs, lighting the candle, smelling the incense, all of those things, putting you into a magical psychological frame of focus so that you're focusing on being in the wish fulfilled as you're doing the spell and even as you're putting the spell together. A lot of the magic will happen when you're thinking about your bag that you're going to make, and you start to think about the pieces that are going to go into it, and sometimes what you're wanting to use it for will actually manifest before you've even done the bag, depending on how close it is into your sphere of manifestation. Okay, working with the feminine and masculine to manifest it. Oh, okay, they just manifested to you as you were working with them. Okay, well, go with it. Go with it, whatever comes to you. So if you're working with the god and goddess, the feminine and masculine in general, and then two deities pop up and they may not necessarily belong to the same pantheon, just go with it. See where it takes you, because it's something that's come up for you. And you don't necessarily have to follow those rules if they've come to you. So explore that. So far I work with Hecate, but I'm drawn to Norse as well, given where my family are from. But I don't think Hecate is done with me. Okay, well, yeah, she'll take her, she'll do what she does. There's no harm in actually working with other deities alongside. Like if you work with Hecate in your own, whatever work you do with Hecate, you can still begin to explore and work with other deities as well, separate to Hecate. She's not a jealous deity, so it's not like she's going to get upset with you because you've decided you want to work with Odin and Freya or something like that. Wicca teaches you about yourself, yes, and it should definitely teach about ourselves. Celtic can only work with Aphrodite and Hecate. Awesome. My background is Celt as well as Saxon, and I work with Hecate, and I also work with deities from different pantheons too at different times. What if I don't want to follow certain things that others may say are necessary, like casting a circle? Can I do what just feels right? Does that make me any less Wiccan? Not necessarily. I mean, casting a circle is something that Wiccans do, but it's not necessarily something that you would have to do. There's different circle castings too in Wicca. Yes, there's the traditional way of casting a circle where you tend to work with the pentagrams, which comes out of the Alexandrian tradition. There's other schools of Wicca that don't work with that at all. They just work more from a shamanic perspective, where if they do cast a circle or space, they'll just work with bringing the elements in at each of the portals and focusing more on the element itself and what that feels like. I don't cast circles very often these days. I do most of my spell work is done out of a Wiccan circle. I really only do Wiccan circles when I really feel drawn to doing them a lot of the time now, because I know personally that as helpful as they are and as much as they can help with the energy and they can help you feel like you're really in this sacred space, and that's certainly their function, there are times when you can create that space without necessarily going through the motions of doing the circle physically. You could do it astrally through using your imagination and create a circle astrally, or you can set up a circle more of energy or of light and do your workings within that circle of light. It can be very, very flexible, and that's what I mean by eclectic, like eclectic Wicca, meaning you don't have to stick to doing a circle every time you do something. Covens worked, of course, with the circles because you're dealing a lot with groups of people in the one space. And I certainly like to construct a circle when I'm doing group work in a physical space, because it just creates that group connection and solidarity within the group when you're setting up something together and building something together. But when I'm practicing by myself or doing anything by myself, I won't necessarily set up a Wiccan circle. So there you go. Working on your Hecate. Can you protect yourself with others' way? You mean by others' way? I'm not quite sure what you mean by others' way. Or another way, by other ways of protecting yourself. I'm not sure what that means. Do circles all the time. Awesome. Yep. Use physical items to cast a circle, like crystals. Yes, you can have crystals in your circle. You could have different crystals at each of the 4 elemental points if you wanted to do that. Too messy for me. Unless you don't do it with salt. Yeah. I've never cast a circle with salt. I've never used salt, particularly doing it outdoors. You don't want to salinate the soil. We have a lot of problems with salination in parts of Australia. So I've never used salt to cast a circle. And we never used it in the, mind you, I do mix the salt with the water and then sprinkle the salt water around the circle, but I don't actually do the really heavy laden salt around the circle like you'd find more in ceremonial magic. I use a bell. Yes, bells are great. Use the salt, but can't vacuum at night. All right, okay. On baneful magic. So baneful magic, I'm interpreting that to mean magic that's harmful, like it's going to harm somebody. I totally say that harming someone does go against the Wiccan read, because harming is not, well, we try not to harm anybody. And is it necessary to harm that person, or is there a way of defending yourself or dealing with that person in a way that's not going to be harmful? A lot of the time that the desire to harm comes out of resentment sometimes, or comes out of a need to have revenge on somebody. And revenge is a very toxic emotion. And I can certainly understand the feeling of revenge, because I feel vengeful myself at times. But acting on that can be harmful for ourselves, because it's such a toxic emotion. And when you're doing baneful magic, you have to get into those emotions. You've got to get into the emotion of anger and vengefulness, and that's really heavy on your own energy, and putting that out into the world, because the universe mirrors back what we put out. It's not the best way to operate, even if it's really tempting, and even if you feel justified doing it. Try to find a way that you can either protect yourself or deal with the situation in a way that's not necessarily going to be really harmful to yourself or to the other person. The only time I would say baneful magic would be necessary is if you really are threatened, like your life's threatened seriously, and that's the only option you have, as you would if you were practicing martial arts or any other form of self-defense, in martial arts, sometimes you've got to take it to its conclusion. So sometimes you have to do that in magic too, but they would be very rare and very extreme circumstances for most people. But it depends where you live too. You might live in a really violent area where you may need to live a bit more like that. I'm trying to put to block an unwanted spirit. Yes, blocking spirits you can do energetically. Circles are great with blocking out any negative spirits or negative energy. I recommend that you do circles if you're in an area that you're not familiar with, or you're outside perhaps and you're not familiar with the spirits of that area, just to keep yourself safe and to help keep yourself safe from people too. Particularly if you're working at night in areas where there's not many people around, you want to protect yourself physically as well, and a circle can help with that because you're bringing in those protective elements. So there's protective elements to casting a circle. I have witch bells that I put out during Yule. Beautiful. Scare some spirit away. Yes, scaring them away. If the spirit, you mean that it's actually not a spirit, as in disembodied spirit. Yes, if you need to deter a spirit or deter somebody, there's no harm in calling upon Hecate and other other deities that she works with, such as the Furies or the Gorgon, and get them to help you out with deterring somebody or binding somebody if they're particularly nasty and they're particularly a problem. Florida water, yep, is great. Yes, awesome. It's uplifting and it's also protective. Very happy found your channel. Been following for a long time now and helped understand. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Shah. Okay, Hecate is not jealous. Do you see her separate from other goddesses, or is she one face of the goddess? I've always seen goddesses as different faces for the god. I've always seen the goddess as different faces for the goddesses. I see it. Hecate is quite. I see Hecate separately for me personally, probably because I've worked with her. But I do see her connected in an energetic way to deities like Isis. For me, even though it seems historically there's not necessarily a connection, there are references to to Isis being called Hecate in the northern regions. And I can't remember where that's from. It's from an old text. But I see a connection between her and Isis. I see the goddess in general as being an amalgam, I guess, of all of the different deities, like, say, Hecate, Isis, and all of those aspects. In many ways, Hecate is like the goddess, but then so is Isis and Breed. And if you look at the goddesses historically going back even pre-patriarchal pagan times, the goddesses had a lot more about them than what we know of them today. Like Aphrodite, for example, was a lot more than just like a sex goddess or a love goddess. There was a lot more to her. The same with Venus. So it's understanding that the different names are really just different aspects of the one goddess or the one divine feminine. And I do feel that Hecate, as does Isis, tends to encompass a lot of them. So it's learning about them through the way that you relate to them and the way that you're experiencing them, rather than necessarily somebody telling you that, because it's such an experiential experience that you really, really do have to come at it from a more phenomenological point of view rather than what somebody says, because everybody experiences these things differently. Okay. The person will find you annoying if you do. Okay, that must be coming from other comments. Okay, so doing detection magic. Yes, you can do things like that with wards or with talismans. So you could program a ring or something to be like a detection device, so that if anything was there was any malfeasance being directed at you, then you would be more aware of it. Often if you do a talisman to protect you from any malfeasance energetically, it will ping anyway and do what it does protection wise. So yes, you can do detection spells. Evil is from humanity and our ignorance of the truth. That's where evil comes from. It comes from our ignorance of the truth. That's how I really feel evil comes from. And that's something that comes from from a Buddhist point of view as well. But it's like evil doesn't exist from its own side. It's actually coming from the ego and our ignorance of the truth. That's where I would say evil comes from. There's polarity within the divine, but what we consider evil too is another thing that we would need to debate as well. More about Hecate's connection to the Furies and Gorgons. The whole detection of good and bad energy is based on intuition. Yes. I would do a talisman if you wanted to do detection. Of course, divination is handy as well. Hecate, Demeter, and Persephone are linked through law. Yes, well, if you go through the pantheons, you can see historically where they are all linked. Completely agree with this. Agree. Dreamt of fairies, and again, Celtic. Yes. Yeah. A lot of witches work with the fae and work with fae from different places and different cultures and heritages as well. Okay. So before I close, because I do have to go at 10:30, because I do have someone to speak to at 10:30. If you want to learn Wicca with me in an eclectic style, but with a group of people, like-minded people, then have a look at the Mystery Witch School 101 Academy. It is a 12-month course set out traditionally, as in the way that I was taught Wicca, which was over initially the first 12 months, and then second degree was 12 months after that. And there's certain core things that you do within the first 12 months of Wicca. I've incorporated a little bit of the second degree stuff in there as well. But it's an online course. We meet as a group over Zoom twice a month for the new moon and full moons, and get together and do ritual online, as well as chat and do guided meditations during those times as well. The course is there to help you start practicing Wicca as your spiritual path, learning about spells, energy work, working with the circle, doing circle work, working with your tools, working with the deities, your Sabbats, your moons. We work with Hecate. There's a whole module for Hecate there in the course, as well as some other deities that we work with too. So if you want to work with me and practice witchcraft or in a Wiccan flavor, I'll put the link in the chat right now. And it's also in the description field under the video once it's published. So I'll click on that there. And my cat wants to go out. Okay, so blessed be everyone. Yes, in a minute. So blessed be everyone. They'll be alive next week. Next week we're going to be talking about shadow work and the inner child. So what the inner child has to do with shadow work, because I know that a lot of you are into shadow work, because that really is a part of Wicca, and learning about ourselves and working with our shadow self so that we can learn to love ourselves more, and warts and all, and to be able to create happier lives simply through that self-knowledge and changing those things that we believe about ourselves and the world that aren't helping us at all. And our inner child is a part of that. So we'll be talking about that next week at the same time. So blessed be, and thank you all.